They're dialing the cops on me for trespassing on land I bought. Valerie Thompson just paid for an $8,000 fence around our Maple Ridge Lake access. She's standing there with Officer Reyes demanding I be cuffed for endangering community safety. What would you do if your HOA president tried to snatch your kid's fishing spot? Here's what Valerie doesn't realize. While she's been acting like the neighborhood dictator, I've been buried in property law. And that ground her fancy fence is planted on, I purchased it from the state for $15,000. I'm watching her smug grin fade as I hand Reyes my property deed. Her illegal fence is now trespassing on my land. Where are you watching from? Does your neighborhood have a Valerie too? Because what I'm about to do next is going to turn her power trip into the most expensive mistake she's ever made. The flavor of justice is about to get very, very sweet. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 and I've worked as an electrical contractor in this town for 15 years. Divorced dad of 2 kids. Lily's 14 and thinks she knows everything. Noah's 11 and still thinks I'm the smartest guy in the world. I'm trying to keep it that way as long as I can. We live in a Maple Ridge subdivision, this planned neighborhood built around a natural lake back in 1994. 127 houses, mostly families. The sort of place where kids ride bikes until dark and neighbors actually know each other's names. At least it used to be that kind of place. I bought our home in 2012 using my grandfather's inheritance. Gramps was one of the original surveyors for this development, spent months walking these woods with his transit and measuring tape, making sure everything was laid out just right. He always said this lake was the heart of the community, and that's why he made sure every family would have access to it. Every Saturday morning, for 11 years, we'd walk down that path to the water. Me with my tackle box, the kids with their juice boxes and whatever book they were reading. Summer meant swimming lessons, Lily doing cannonballs, while Noah practiced floating on his back. Fall meant casting for base and watching the leaves change. Winter meant ice skating when it got cold enough. That path wasn't just a route to the lake. It was access to being a family. Then Valerie Thompson got elected HOA president. Picture the person who counts your grass blades and times your garbage pickup to the minute. Silver bob haircut that never shifts even in the wind. Always carrying that leather-bound planner like it's the Constitution. Drives a white BMW SUV with, I kid you not, HOA board vanity plates. If pettiness had a poster child, Valerie would be holding the Employee of the Month plaque. Her husband Mark's a decent guy, but he's got that worn-out look of a man who stopped arguing years ago. Nods and escapes to his workshop whenever Valerie starts planning her next community improvement crusade. Can't say I blame him. Valerie's been president for 6 years straight because nobody else wanted the migraine. But somewhere along the way, she forgot she was supposed to serve the neighborhood, not rule it. Her favorite expressions are property values and maintaining standards. But what she really means is control. The first warning sign came last spring with her beautification campaign. Suddenly, certain houses needed landscaping upgrades. Guess whose place got singled out for having a lake view obstruction? Namely, the tire swing my dad and I hung for the kids on the old oak tree. $500 fine for unapproved recreational equipment. I can still taste how my morning coffee turned sour when she showed up at 7 a.m., clicking across my driveway in those sharp heels, waving that violation notice like a victory flag. I should have realized then that this was just the beginning, but I paid the fine, took down the swing, and figured that would be the end of it. The sound of my kids asking, "Why can't we have our swing back, Dad?" should have been my wake-up call. That night, I started digging into HOA bylaws. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, but something told me Valerie Thompson was only getting warmed up. 2 weeks after the swing incident, Valerie called an emergency board meeting. And by emergency, I mean she sent out notices at 6 p.m. on a Friday for a Monday night session. Real emergencies don't wait for convenient scheduling, but apparently Valerie's idea of crisis management runs on bankers' hours. The topic, safety concerns at the lake access point. I showed up to find Valerie at the head of the community center table, flanked by her usual suspects, Denise, the secretary, taking notes like she's recording the Gettysburg Address, and Greg, the treasurer, looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal. About 12 other homeowners scattered around those uncomfortable metal folding chairs, the kind that squeak every time you shift your weight. Valerie launched into this dramatic presentation about liability issues and insurance requirements. She'd even brought props, a manila folder full of what she claimed were official reports recommending we restrict unsupervised access to common water areas. The insurance company is very clear, she declared, waving papers like evidence in a courtroom. We need immediate safety barriers to protect the association from lawsuits. Here's where things got interesting. I raised my hand, polite as you please, and asked to see a copy of this insurance report. You know, the one that was supposedly so urgent it demanded an emergency meeting. Valerie's perfectly applied lipstick pulled into a thin line. The board will review all relevant documentation and make appropriate materials available after proper consideration. Translation. How dare you question me, peasant? But I'm a contractor. I deal with insurance companies, safety regulations, and liability issues every day. So the next morning, I called our HOA's insurance provider directly. Took exactly 4 minutes to confirm what I suspected. No such report existed, no safety assessment, no new requirements, nothing. And that's when I dove into those bylaws I'd been skimming. Turns out Valerie had broken at least 3 different rules with her little emergency meeting. HOA bylaws require 30 days notice for any alterations to common areas. Emergency powers only apply to genuine hazards, burst pipes, storm damage, actual emergencies, not Valerie's manufactured crisis. But here's the beautiful part. I didn't just get angry, I got organized. I spent the next week going door to door with a survey. Not some formal petition that might spook people, just a neighbor asking neighbors what they thought about restricting lake access. 89% opposed any restrictions. Even some of Valerie's usual supporters started asking questions. The smell of fresh printer ink filled my garage as I ran copies of everything. The survey results, the bylaw violations, photos of our kids enjoying the lake for over a decade. I documented it all with timestamps, witness statements, and cross-references that would make a paralegal proud. Valerie's reaction was predictable. She brushed off all objections as troublemaking by a vocal minority and scheduled the official vote for the Tuesday after Labor Day weekend. You know, when half the families with kids would be squeezing in one last vacation before school started. She happened to forget to notify about 20 homeowners about the rescheduled date. Funny how those 20 were the ones who'd raised concerns about her plan. The vote passed 3, one with Greg abstaining, but Greg looked like he wanted to crawl under the table while he did it. Valerie smiled that triumphant smile and announced that temporary safety barriers would be installed within the week. The taste of betrayal was bitter in my mouth as I watched our neighbors file out. Most of them had no idea they'd just been steamrolled by parliamentary procedure and selective communication. But I had paperwork proving the meeting was improper. Every violation, every procedural shortcut, every convenient omission was now part of an official record. As I walked home that night, my boots crunching on the gravel path I'd soon lose access to, I was planning my next move. Valerie thought she'd won. She had no idea the game was just beginning. Thursday morning, 6 a.m. on the dot, I was 40 minutes away on a job site wrestling with a stubborn electrical panel when my phone started lighting up with texts from neighbors. Installation crew at the lake. They're putting up a fence. Where are you? By the time I made it back home that afternoon, it was finished. 8 feet of decorative wrought iron fencing stretched across what used to be our shared path. Professional job, concrete footings, the whole package, and right in the center, a single gate with a shiny new lock. The sign bolted next to it made my blood pressure spike. Lake access by appointment only. Contact HOA board for scheduling. 48-hour notice required. 2 days notice just to walk to a lake in my own subdivision. Valerie was watering her flower beds when I pulled into the driveway, humming some cheerful tune like she just hit the jackpot. She gave me a little finger wave. Not friendly, more like a queen acknowledging a commoner. Safety first, Daniel, she called out sweetly. I'm sure you understand. What I understood was that I needed to dig a lot deeper. That night, after Lily and Noah went to bed, asking why they weren't allowed to go fishing anymore, I drove to the county records office. You know that musty scent of old paper and industrial carpet? That's what determination smells like. At 8 p.m. on a Thursday, the clerk on duty was a patient older woman who probably dealt with upset homeowners every day. I told her what I needed. Original subdivision plat maps, anything showing how the lake access was designated. She vanished into the basement archives and came back with a treasure haul. The original 1994 subdivision agreement turned out to be surprisingly fascinating reading. My grandfather's survey notes were still attached, written in his careful engineer's handwriting. And there it was, clear as sunlight. The lake access path was specifically labeled as a permanent common area easement. Not a convenience, not a perk, a permanent legal right. That's when it really got interesting. Gramps had written detailed notes about negotiations with the original developer. The lake access wasn't tossed in as an afterthought. It was a selling feature, a promise made to every family who bought a home there. Natural lake access for all residents in perpetuity. Perpetuity. That's attorney language for forever, in case Valerie needed it spelled out. I copied everything. 47 pages of legal paperwork, maps, and correspondence. The next morning, I called an emergency town hall of my own. I taped flyers on every door, sent emails, made calls. If Valerie could call emergency meetings, so could I. 43 neighbors showed up. Biggest HOA gathering anyone could remember. I brought coffee and grocery store donuts. Nothing elaborate, but the smell of fresh caffeine and sugar helped ease everyone's frustration. I spread the original plat maps out across 3 folding tables, pointing to the permanent easement marking. Jim Kowalski, retired cop, sharp as a tack, started asking the kind of direct questions that make lawyers sweat. "So this easement was part of every deed when we bought our homes?" Jim asked. "That's right. It's legally protected." And the HOA board just ignored that, apparently. Valerie showed up halfway through, Mark trailing behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. She stood at the back with her arms folded, that practiced smile tightening by the second. When I finished walking through the evidence, she stepped forward. "The board has already made its decision based on proper legal consultation," she announced. "This meeting is irregular and has no standing." That's when Greg, the treasurer, did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He cleared his throat and said, "Actually, Valerie, I don't remember seeing any legal consultation about permanent easements." You could have heard a pin drop. Greg had just contradicted the Queen in public. Valerie's polished composure cracked just enough to show what lay underneath. "Once property values stabilize, we can revisit this issue," she snapped. Then she caught herself, but it was too late. Property values stabilize? After what? I glanced around the room and saw the same question flickering in everyone's eyes. That's when Maria Santos, the 3rd-grade teacher who lived 2 streets over, lifted her hand. "Valerie, are you planning to sell your house?" "That's none of anyone's business," Valerie shot back, but her face had gone 3 shades paler. The meeting wrapped up with more questions than answers. But I'd gotten what I wanted. People were beginning to see through Valerie's safety routine, and Greg, bless him, had proven there were cracks in the board's unity. As folks filtered out, Mrs. Chen, who lived there since the original build, pulled me aside. Her voice was quiet but steady. She told me Valerie had approached her about selling 6 months earlier, asked if she'd consider a cash offer from a motivated buyer. Suddenly, Valerie's crusade wasn't about rules or safety at all. It was about money. And if she was tied up with buyers or investors, that changed everything. If I thought Valerie would back off after being called out, I severely underestimated her taste for vindictive pettiness. Within a week of my town hall, she launched what I can only call an intimidation campaign that would make a mob boss proud. First came the architectural review violations. My mailbox, the same basic black post-in box that had stood there for 11 years, was suddenly out of compliance with community standards. Apparently, the HOA had quietly updated the approved mailbox specs, and mine was now 3 inches too tall and the wrong shade of black. Then my driveway got cited for an oil spot about the size of a quarter. Never mind that Mark Thompson's driveway looked like an oil change commercial gone wrong, or that half the driveways in the neighborhood had similar marks from normal car wear. Valerie's real talent, though, was the whisper campaign. She started dropping casual remarks to neighbors about my concerning behavior and aggressive attitude toward women in authority. Nothing concrete, nothing you could nail down, just a steady drip of poison into day-to-day conversations at the mailboxes. Maria told me she'd overheard Valerie at the grocery store implying that my association with troublemakers could affect other homeowners standing with the board. The aroma of fresh bread from the bakery section apparently couldn't cover the stink of Valerie's manipulation. So I decided to fight lies with paper. As a homeowner, I had the legal right to inspect HOA financial records. Most people don't realize this, but every association is required to make its books available. It took 3 written requests and a warning that I'd bring in an attorney, but Valerie finally, grudgingly, allowed access. What I found in those statements was fascinating. And by fascinating, I mean possibly criminal. $12,000 in landscaping improvements over the last year. Every cent paid to Thompson Services, Mark's company. No competitive bids, no approvals from the full membership. Just checks cut to the president's husband for vaguely described community enhancement work. I spent a weekend charting every expense, cross-checking with actual visible changes in the neighborhood. The numbers just didn't line up. Either Mark was the priciest landscaper in the tri-state area, or someone was treating the HOA account like a personal ATM. Jim had been showing up to board meetings, taking notes in that meticulous cop way that makes guilty people sweat. When I showed him the financial oddities, his eyebrows shot up. 12 grand for landscaping, huh? He flipped on through his meeting notes. I don't remember us ever voting on major landscape projects. That's because there were no votes. Valerie signed them all off as routine maintenance. Routine maintenance doesn't usually cost more than a used car in decent shape. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was beginning to rally on its own. Maria put together a childcare co-op, which sounds innocent enough until you realize it meant parents were talking, swapping stories, comparing notes about Valerie's behavior. Mrs. Chen started hosting coffee mornings where longtime residents shared what the area used to be like. These weren't protests or formal resistance, just neighbors being neighbors. But it was exactly the sort of thing that threatened Valerie's control. Her answer was, predictably, petty. She called county code enforcement on my work truck parked in my own driveway. The truck was parked legally, fully registered, no issues, but it forced me to lose a day of work to meet with the inspector, who showed up looking apologetic and mildly irritated his time was being wasted. "Ma'am, there's nothing wrong with this vehicle," he told Valerie when she wandered over to watch the inspection. "It's a work truck parked at the owner's residence, completely legal." That night, while I was helping Noah with his math homework, he looked up at me with those serious 11-year-old eyes. "Dad, why can't we go fishing anymore?" How do you explain petty tyranny to a child? How do you tell your son that some adults never outgrow playground bullying? They just get better at hiding it behind rules and procedures. "We'll figure it out, buddy," I promised him. "Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated. But we'll find a way." Lily, eavesdropping from the kitchen, cut in with teenage bluntness. "It's because Mrs. Thompson is being mean, right? Olivia's mom says she's trying to make people move away." Kids slice right through the nonsense and see the truth. Adults try to smother it in fancy language. That Saturday morning, I stood at the locked gate, watching other families load up cars and drive to parks and lakes 20 minutes away for the same things we used to do in our own backyard. The click of that padlock as I tugged it one more time wasn't just annoying, it was heartbreaking. But standing there watching my kid's childhood being stolen by someone's power trip, I made a decision. This wasn't just about property law anymore. This was about making sure Noah and Lily grew up knowing that bullies don't always win, that sometimes the good guys push back and actually succeed. I just needed to figure out how. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen at 2 a.m. when you're running on stale coffee, stubbornness, and pure spite. That's where I was, hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of printed documents, old plats, and half-eaten takeout, when I finally spotted something that didn't fit. I'd been comparing the original 1994 plat maps with the modern tax records, studying every boundary line and parcel ID like it was a puzzle I was determined to solve before sunrise. Most of it was routine: lot lines, utility easements, setbacks, boring but necessary. But then something about the parcel for the lake access path jumped out at me. The parcel number didn't match any HOA-owned land. Every lot in Maple Ridge was listed under either private ownership or under the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. But the strip of land that held the lake access, where Valerie had proudly planted her fence, was neither. It was designated under an entirely different parcel number. Not private property, not HOA property. Something else entirely. I pulled up the county assessor's database and chased that parcel through 30 years of records. And what I found made me sit back, rub my eyes, and whisper, "No way." The path wasn't HOA land at all. It never had been. The original developer, Maple Ridge Properties LLC, had retained ownership of that strip and a tiny piece of shoreline and a small island for future public park development. That was the plan. But Maple Ridge Properties went bankrupt during the 2008 crash. When a developer collapses without transferring property, the remaining assets revert to the state land bank, meaning the path Valerie fenced off, our path, had been state property for 15 years, and Valerie had no authority whatsoever to fence it, lock it, or regulate it. But the best part? That land had been quietly listed for sale on a badly outdated state website, buried beneath broken links and forms that looked like they hadn't been updated since dial-up internet. Parcel 52 C17R MISC, 0.3 acres, includes lake access and a small offshore island. Minimum bid, $15,000. $15,000 for the land that controlled all access to our lake. $15,000 for the strip. Valerie believed she ruled like a queen. I had about $18,000 sitting in a small retirement account. Money meant for the kids' college someday, or a real emergency. But what's a bigger emergency than your kids losing the place they grew up? I stared at the listing, at the minimum bid amount, at the instructions for submitting a purchase request. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. The application wasn't complicated, at least not for someone used to construction contracts and regulatory paperwork. Environmental review, title search, background verification, intent statement. The whole thing was designed to discourage casual buyers. But once you showed you understood the regulations and didn't plan to misuse the land, the process moved surprisingly fast. I spent the next 3 days calling every relevant state agency: fisheries, environmental conservation, county zoning, watershed management. I learned more about shoreline protection laws in one weekend than most residents learn in a lifetime. And every office confirmed the same thing. Valerie's fence installation had violated multiple environmental codes. Her concrete footings disrupted runoff. The fence interfered with permitted wildlife travel routes. She'd caused actual erosion in the process of trying to prevent fictional hazards. Meanwhile, Valerie's paranoia was growing. She could sense something changing in the neighborhood, but had no idea what. She noticed more people talking, organizing, whispering. She spotted me visiting the county office. She saw Maria hosting more porch gatherings, and because Valerie's worldview framed everything through control, she assumed she was losing hers. That made her dangerous. She filed more complaints, this time against 3 other families who had dared attend my town hall. She claimed one family's swing set violated noise standards. Another homeowner's porch lights were excessively bright. She even tried to ban Mrs. Chen's weekly morning gatherings by claiming they violated unauthorized assembly rules. But while she was spiraling, we were preparing. My brother Michael, a real estate attorney in Chicago, handled the legal roadmap. "You're doing this?" he asked at 6 a.m. when I called to confirm my next step. "I'm doing this." "All right, then let's make sure you do it right." Every night our little crew met in my kitchen. Me, Jim, Maria, Mrs. Chen, and eventually Greg, quietly slipping in after dark. We didn't meet in secret, we met in plain sight. But we met quietly enough that Valerie couldn't figure out what we were planning, and it drove her insane. Meanwhile, the state processed my bid. Environmental review passed. Title verification cleared. Financial paperwork approved. My cashier's check submitted. All that was left was closing. 6 weeks. That was the timeline. We just had to stay steady, stay calm, and avoid giving Valerie an excuse to blow everything up. 6 weeks until everything changed. 6 weeks until the land beneath Valerie's fence became mine. 6 weeks until the real fight and the real freedom began. 4 weeks before closing, Valerie's paranoia kicked into overdrive. She still didn't know what we were doing, but she could feel it. The neighborhood had shifted. People weren't avoiding her anymore. They were talking to each other, sharing information, comparing notes, and nothing terrifies a petty tyrant more than a community that suddenly remembers it is a community. So Valerie did what Valerie always did when she felt control slipping. She escalated hard. Early one morning, she showed up on my lawn with an actual ruler. Yes, a physical ruler, and measured random blades of grass. "Your lawn is at 3.1 inches, she announced to no one in particular. snapping photos like she was CSI, Maple Ridge. The limit is 3. My neighbor Frank was washing his car and nearly choked trying not to laugh. Meanwhile, his car soap was running into the storm drain, which technically did violate an ordinance. But magically, Valerie didn't seem interested in noticing that. Next came the anonymous complaint to the city, accusing me of running an unlicensed commercial operation from my house because my work truck was parked in the driveway. A city inspector showed up looking apologetic. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I have to follow up on all reports." He checked my license, registration, zoning laws. Everything was fine. Valerie watched from her window, probably disappointed I wasn't arrested on site. But her most shameless move came when she tried to go after my kids. My kids. One afternoon, my ex-wife Sarah called, confused and irritated. "Daniel, why did a woman from your HOA call me claiming the kids might not be emotionally safe living at your place right now?" My stomach dropped. I explained everything. The fence, the harassment, the lies, the fake rules. Sarah went quiet, then said, "So she's trying to weaponize our kids to get at you?" "Absolutely not. The kids love that lake. They love your house. And nobody is telling them they can't be there because some HOA president is having a meltdown." That support meant more than I could say. It also meant Valerie had crossed a line there was no coming back from. Meanwhile, little cracks in her empire were widening. More families started standing up to her. Mrs. Patterson told Maria she'd received a mysterious cash offer for her home from an unnamed investor, clearly connected to Valerie's push for safety upgrades. 2 other older neighbors received similar proposals. It didn't take a detective to see what was happening. Valerie was trying to reshape the neighborhood, push out long-term residents, bring in buyers who wouldn't question her authority. But her timing was awful. The community was unified like never before. People were documenting everything, taking pictures, saving emails, comparing stories. Even Mark, with shoulders slumped lower each week, looked ashamed walking to his mailbox. Still, Valerie wasn't done. 2 weeks before closing, she went nuclear. She called another emergency board meeting, attended by a grand total of 4 people. Her claimed emergency? A credible threat to community safety caused by certain residents. By certain residents, she meant me. She introduced a resolution trying to ban me from all common areas, including the walking paths and mailbox cluster, declaring me a potential trespass risk. It was so absurd even Greg couldn't stomach it. "Valerie, you can't ban a homeowner from common property," he said. "That's not legal." "The board has emergency authority," she snapped. "The board," Greg said slowly, "needs more than one person to make decisions." Then the surprise of the night hit. Denise, her loyal secretary, had quietly resigned 2 days earlier. Even she couldn't deal with Valerie anymore. With Denise gone and Greg refusing to sign anything, Valerie tried one last tactic. Anonymous flyers, professionally printed, dropped on doorsteps, slid under windshield wipers. Concerned neighbors. Alert, resident under investigation for aggressive behavior and financial misconduct. No details, no evidence. Just enough smoke to make people glance sideways. Then she crossed the final line. She called the elementary school, claiming my kids might be struggling due to domestic tension. Lily came home shaken after the school counselor pulled her aside to ask questions about feeling safe. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a power trip. It was war. But here's the twist. The more Valerie lashed out, the more isolated she became. Her closest supporters pulled back. The whispers stopped being about me and started being about her. She sensed she was losing control, but she still had no idea what we were building behind the scenes. And she definitely didn't know what was about to happen when closing day arrived. Only 1 week left. 7 days until everything she'd built her ego on crumbled beneath her feet. 7 days until she found out her fence was sitting on land she didn't own. Land that was already paid for, titled, stamped, and almost officially mine. 7 days until justice. Saturday morning, 9:00 a.m. The hour that used to be our traditional community fishing time before Valerie strangled it with her lock and her rules. But this Saturday was different. This Saturday, 27 families gathered in front of the fence she'd built. Despite her threats, despite her warnings, despite her emergency powers, word had spread through Maria's network, through Mrs. Chen's porch gatherings, through the quiet hum of neighbors, who were simply tired of being bullied in their own neighborhood. Parents came with fishing poles. Kids brought bikes and buckets. Grandparents set out folding chairs. It looked like a cheerful lake day, except for the 8-foot steel fence cutting off the path. The smell of morning dew mixed with brewed coffee from thermoses as the group waited, talking in low murmurs. I stood by the gate with my old tackle box, just like every Saturday before Valerie had locked us out, but this time my pulse was hammering. At 9:15 on the dot, Valerie pulled up in her white BMW wearing her signature stiff smile. Right behind her rolled a police cruiser. And then, like fate had decided today was extra dramatic, the Channel 7 news van parked beside them. Reporter Jessica Nguyen hopped out with a cameraman already rolling footage. Valerie strutted toward the crowd like she expected applause. "This is an illegal gathering on private HOA property," she declared loudly enough for the microphones. "Officer Reyes, please advise these individuals to disperse or face trespassing charges." Officer Reyes scanned the crowd of families, toddlers, strollers, retirees, and looked deeply uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said, "I'll need to verify the HOA's authority to restrict access here before taking action." And that was my cue. I stepped forward, pulled the folded documents from my jacket pocket, and held them out. "Officer Reyes," I said clearly, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This land isn't HOA property. As of yesterday at 4 p.m., I legally purchased this entire parcel from the state land bank." A hush fell over the crowd. I handed Reyes the deed, complete with seals, signatures, and a timestamp that might as well have been a victory stamp. Reyes studied it, slow and careful. Then he nodded. "This appears valid. Sir, you're saying the HOA doesn't own this land at all?" "That's right," I said. "They never did. The fence was installed illegally on state property, and now on my property." Valerie's face contorted through disbelief, fury, panic, and denial in seconds. "No, no, this is HOA land. The board governs all common areas." "Actually," I said loud enough for the camera, "the original developer retained this parcel. It reverted to the state after bankruptcy, and now it belongs to me. The HOA had no right to fence it, lock it, or restrict access." That's when Jim stepped in with another folder, his evidence file. "While we're discussing rights," he said calmly, "we should also talk about the $12,000 in HOA funds that went to your husband's company for non-existent landscaping." The crowd gasped. Jessica Nguyen's camera zoomed in so fast I swear I heard it click. Greg, the treasurer, stepped forward next, holding his own stack of records. "I've confirmed it," he said quietly. "The payments were unauthorized. This needs to be investigated." Valerie tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "You're all making a terrible mistake. You're destroying the community." Jessica stepped closer with her mic. "Mrs. Thompson, can you comment on the allegations of financial misuse by the HOA?" Valerie froze. Her eyes darted between the crowd, the camera, the officer, the gate, like a person watching her last lifeline snap. And that's when I delivered the line I'd been holding for weeks. "As the new legal owner of this land," I said, "I'm restoring permanent public access to this lake for all Maple Ridge residents. No fees, no appointments, no restrictions. Exactly how it was meant to be." The cheer that erupted echoed across the water. Kids rushed forward, parents laughing, neighbors hugging. Even Officer Reyes grinned. "The fence comes down today," I announced. "I have the permits, the tools, and about 30 volunteers." And right there, with the news cameras rolling, we dismantled Valerie's monument to control. By noon, the iron sections were stacked neatly by the curb. The path was open. The sunlight reflected off the water like it had been waiting months for this moment. Valerie, realizing there was nothing left for her to boss, stormed back to her car and peeled out of the neighborhood. It was the last time any of us saw her at Maple Ridge. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. The lake path was restored. Kids were fishing again every weekend. Families picnicked along the shore. The community rewrote the HOA bylaws, adding term limits, transparency rules, and what everyone now jokingly calls the Valerie Rule, preventing any one person from holding unchecked authority. We even filed a conservation easement guaranteeing public lake access forever. No future president could ever fence it off again. Valerie put her house on the market 6 weeks after the incident and moved to a gated community in another town. Mark stayed behind, quietly divorced her, and personally apologized to every neighbor. State officials even contacted me about testifying in favor of HOA reform. Our story went viral, featured on morning shows and homeowner forums across the country. But the best victory wasn't online. It was right here. Lily and Noah now run fishing lessons for younger kids. Mrs. Chen hosts lakeside history circles. Neighbors who barely spoke before now host block parties by the water. And every time I walk that path my grandfather surveyed decades ago, I remember. Real power isn't control. It's community. It's standing up for what's right. It's making sure the next generation knows that bullies, no matter how many titles they hide behind, don't get the final say.